Hello there, I'm Brian. Welcome to my photo show. Today's topic, the Nikon F-301 versus the Minolta 7000. The F-301 was also known as the N-2000 in North America. The Minolta 7000 had three different names. In North America, it was the Maxim, in Europe, the Dynax, and in Japan, the Alpha. Mechanically the same, the names are just for marketing purposes. Okay, let's take a look and compare. Both of these cameras were introduced in 1985, and both are available on the used market today for very little money. You can find very nice examples of these in excellent top shape for $25 or $35. They're not that popular. I believe the lack of popularity is because they do not have the manual film advance, and so they don't have that retro hipster appeal to them. But they do work, and they work very well. And if you're on a budget and you're looking to get into film photography, the consumer SLRs of the 1980s are really cheap nowadays. So let's take a look at these two. These are two of the more popular ones. One from Nikon, one from Minolta. Both introduced in 1985, as I mentioned, but representing radically different design philosophies. The Minolta 7000 was was revolutionary. This was the first modern interchangeable lens SLR with autofocus. That is, there were some earlier SLRs that had autofocus available, notably the Nikon F3, I think the Canon T80. A handful of others, but they were big and bulky, and they had these big bulbous things on the side of the lenses that contained the autofocus unit, and they were just absurdly ridiculous looking, and nobody bought them, and they are today of interest strictly to people who collect obsolete technology. I would not actually try to use one. This, however, has a modern layout and modern functionality, so it's worth considering. Let's compare the top plate. There's a big difference between the top plate on the Minolta and the Nikon. The Nikon comes from a much more conservative, let's take a look at it, let's do this, a much more conservative design philosophy. You've got a traditional shutter speed dial here. Put it on A, press the button to unlock. Again, that's very typical for the shutter speed dials of the, say, late 1970s and early 1980s. You've got a exposure compensation dial here and the ISO dial here where you lift to adjust. This is all very typical of cameras of the 1970s. Shutter release is where you'd expect it. It's a button. To select the mode, you lift and turn the collar around the shutter release button. Again, many cameras of the 1970s had a locking function around the collar. So again, that's very conventional. And to change the aperture, you change the aperture on the physical aperture ring, just like you would on a traditional SLR from the 1960s or 1970s. So the Nikon represented a very conservative design philosophy. The Minolta, on the other hand, was radical and brand new. So this is the Minolta top plate consists of these 4 select buttons for the various functions. Mode is exposure mode. Drive mode means single frame or multiple frame advance, motor drive advance, or self-timer. Plus minus button is for exposure compensation and ISO. So you push these buttons down and then you adjust the function by pushing on these buttons right here. Also, you activate the light meter by slight touch on the shutter release button. I'm not sure how that senses how that knows your fingers there, but it's very slight, very light touch. And to change the aperture, you push these buttons here on the side. So the control placement is a non-standard, but you can get used to non-standard control placement. That's not my main criticism. My main criticism of the Minolta layout versus the Nikon is the LCD screen. Okay, all the information you need to control the camera is contained here on the LCD screen. If this thing goes out, you're screwed. And these things leak, at least on the Minoltas they do. Nikon F3s, they used LCDs. To my knowledge, they're not known for leaking. They've held intact over the years. That's really good. These things on this particular camera, they leak. This camera's in mint condition. It was stored very well, and it still has a little bit of leakage in the corners here. That doesn't interfere with my ability to read the information yet, but over time the leaking will progress. It will get worse, and that is a big, big disadvantage. So in terms of control placement, Nikon wins hands down. It's simply more reliable. Minolta went, I mean, they took a gamble, and I'm not going to say they took a gamble and lost, but you know, when you're doing something that new, if one thing goes wrong, in this case the LCD screen, you know, that's it. I mean, once the LCD screen goes out and you can no longer read it, then this thing's a paperweight. Okay, the batteries. So both of these cameras take 4 AAA batteries. The Minolta, let's see here, where's my little coin? Oh, doggone it. The Minolta has the batteries on the side, and the, oh, here it is, and the Nikon on the bottom plate. So if I remove the batteries here, okay, I can see the Minolta battery compartment is one piece. All right, it's a one-piece battery compartment for the 4 AAA batteries. It screws on very easily, very conveniently. You can almost do it without that coin, but not really. Almost. It's best to tighten it up. Okay. The Nikon, on the other hand, requires that you remove the base plate, like so. Again, this is, and this, in the 70s and 80s, some cameras required that you remove the base plate to attach a motor drive. So again, removing the base plate was not a, it was not a daring, bold move on Nikon's part. And then you pull out the carrier like so. So here's the disadvantage to the Nikon. It's a 2-piece system. Got this one piece here. Slide that back in. Okay, the battery carrier. And then I have to put the base plate back on. So it's a slightly more complex operation than the Minolta, which simply slides off right here. Now, having said that, while we're on the topic of batteries, the Minolta does not have an off switch. The Minolta has 3 positions for its main switch: lock, on, and beep. Lock simply means the controls are locked, and if I press buttons, it's not going to do anything. But the camera is not off. It is still draining power from the batteries, and if you leave it for a few days, it will kill the batteries. I know this from experience. It happened to me when I put a roll of film through this. I let it sit for a couple days, picked it back up, and I could get it to shoot, and then it would just go dead. And then I have to wait a few more minutes, and it would sort of come back to life a little bit. Again, just dead, and I replaced the batteries, and it was fine. So, battery drain issue with the Minolta, but not the Nikon. I've shot several rolls of film through the Nikon. If you put the Nikon in the L for lock position, the camera's off. It's not drawing power, and the batteries will last just fine. So that's an issue with the Minolta. You've got to remove the battery pack at the end of the day if you still have film in the camera. Don't let it sit overnight with the batteries in it. It will continue to drain. All right. Next issue we're going to look at: size and weight. The Minolta is smaller and lighter. Okay. Not sure how well you can see this on the video, but the Minolta is most definitely a smaller camera, and it is also, well, I don't know. Well, just take my word for it. The Minolta is, in fact, smaller and lighter. I don't know how to demonstrate that well on this. Maybe like so. I don't know. Does that show? What does that look like? Never mind. So Minolta wins for being smaller and lighter. Let's see here. Exposure modes. The Nikon offers manual and full stop increments for the shutter speed. It offers aperture priority, standard program mode, and program high, which favors higher shutter speeds. Those are your exposure modes. The Minolta, let's see, here we go. So the Minolta has mode button, here we go. The Minolta has program, aperture priority, manual, shutter priority, And another thing you should notice with the program mode is it is a variable program. That is, if I press these buttons while in the program mode, the shutter speed and the aperture will change, but they will stay in the same relation to one another. So you're still going to get a good exposure. So 250 and 5.6 is equivalent to 125 and 3.5, is that right? 250 and 2.4? No, wait a minute, 250. Oh, I'm sorry, so I'm pushing this button. Let's go back to program. There we go. All right, program. Now take my finger off here, and 125 and 3.5 is what it's giving me now. 100 f4, 16.45, 45 and 5.6, 30 and 6.7, 20 and f8. So you can see I can adjust the shutter speed and the aperture in variable program mode, which is what most cameras have today. Most cameras with program mode nowadays are variable program mode. Whereas the Nikon simply has a, you have to do that, well, sort of manually. The standard program mode is going to give you a standard progression with no variation, and if you want, well, the only variation it offers is the high-speed program mode, which simply keeps the lens wide open in order to favor higher shutter speeds. The Minolta wins in terms of exposure modes. The program mode is more sophisticated, easier to use, better, and it also offers shutter priority automation, whereas the F-301 does not. Viewfinder. Minolta wins hands down. Okay, the viewfinder on the F-301, if you wear glasses, you can't see the shutter speeds on the side. Even when you can, they tend to wash out in bright sunlight, and it does not show the aperture. It doesn't show any information other than the shutter speeds along the right-hand side in a row of red LEDs. For a consumer level camera, that's understandable, but the Minolta offers much better information visibility. At the bottom of the frame, you've got a little strip which is illuminated for low light viewing, and it gives you the shutter speed, the aperture, and the exposure mode. And then to the left of that little strip is the dot and the two arrows for focus confirmation. Well, it's focus confirmation if you're using manual focus, or autofocus indication if you're on autofocus. So in terms of viewfinder information, the Minolta wins hands down. The only other issue really is the focusing modes. That is autofocus versus manual focus. The F-301 has a very bright focusing screen with a traditional split rangefinder focusing aid surrounded by a microprism collar on a ground glass screen, which is very, very bright. It's comparable to anything you get on a digital camera nowadays. The Minolta, on the other hand, has single point autofocus. I think manual focus is better. Single point autofocus, I think, is kind of pointless. The advantage of autofocus, in my opinion, is the ability to track a moving object, which is extremely difficult to do with manual focus, and that is the big contribution to photography that autofocus has given us, in my opinion. If your subject isn't moving, why the heck do you need autofocus? So I think that Nikon's manual focus is preferable, because if you're using your lenses in manual focus mode, the manual focus focusing aids that you see on the center of the focusing screen in the Nikon are going to be far more helpful than the focus confirmation dot that you've got in the Minolta, which is it's no more sensitive. It's no better than autofocus. You're not going to get better results using the confirmation dot versus the autofocus in the Minolta. And if it can't track moving subjects, then what's the freaking point? Again, it was a good, reliable autofocus system for its day. It was certainly better than Nikon's early autofocus system, but it does not offer any kind of tracking. And for that reason, in my opinion, I really don't see the point, and I think manual focus is better. But, just my opinion. Okay, closing word. I really should have another camera here. The Canon T70 was very comparable to these two. It was a direct competitor. It was made around the same time, and it was one of Canon's last manual focus consumer SLRs, internal motor drive, many of the same features as these two cameras, same basic approach, same feature set more or less. I wish I had it with me. I used to own one of those things, and I was pleasantly surprised. It really is kind of an ugly duckling like these as well. But it worked beautifully. Once you get accustomed to the control interface, I was very happy with it. So if you have a Canon, or if you have some Canon lenses, FD series lenses or FL series lenses, check out the T70. That is definitely a worthy competitor to these two. Okay, I think we've covered what we need to do today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and check out the stuff I have for sale. These are not affiliate links. I'm selling my own artwork and my own self-published book, Sweat of My Own Brow, so please check that out. It worked very hard and I'm very proud of them. Thank you now. See you next time. Bye-bye.